is titled Innovating Around the Detours, and I'd like to introduce Lynn Meyers. She is a 1977 graduate of Thomas More and is the producing artistic director of the Ensemble Theatre Cincinnati. I'm going to pause between that, right? That was the whole thing. Just making sure. I'm making sure that Courtney did not have a typo. Where she has directed over 100 world and regional premieres. She directed off-Broadway at the York Theatre and has directed extensively throughout the U.S. and Canada, beginning her career at Cincinnati Playhouse. She has also recently, take note of this, all of you who want to be in the movie, by the way. She was also recently the location casting director for Shirley, Bones and All, and Wise Guys. She is a past member of the Thomas More Board of Trustees and was named one of 4 finalists for the Zelda, this is one last name I did not ask the pronunciation on, Fitzgerald? Thank you, okay, that's what she said. National Award, honoring directors whose work is making an impact on the art form and their community. I encourage you to read her impressive bio in full in the program. Please welcome Lynn Meyers.
Well, hi. Good morning. First of all, thank you for coming. Second of all, I'm sorry, I'm really wet right now. So worst hair day ever, but here I am, and I am so grateful to be back at a place that absolutely positively changed my life. So what I'm going to do today is share with you a not very exciting, glamorous story, but a story about what you do when everything you've planned for goes wrong. And I tend to have a knack in my life to attract things that go wrong. I make a lot of plans, I make a lot of lists. In fact, I wrote stuff down to talk about today, and it got wet. And I tried to recreate it, so we're just going to chat a little bit about faith and about hope and tenacity. So quickly about what you see here. Ensemble Theatre Cincinnati is a professional theater dedicated to the production of new work new to the region, and work with a social conscience. So that doesn't mean that every play that I do is sad. It doesn't mean that every play I do is angry. What it does mean is that every play I do is current. Every play I do is about something that I feel is important from what I hear from listening to the community. So you're going to hear a little bit later on from the phenomenal Judith Marlowe, who is a champion in testing to make sure that children from birth can hear, so that if they can't, there's things that you can do so that they can experience this world. Well, I think one of the greatest gifts I was given at birth was the ability to hear. So I listened. And by listening, I learned something spectacular every day. Not new, spectacular. Okay, we all got to wake up today. Let's start with being grateful for that. Let's start with knowing that no matter how wet you get, or no matter how late you are, or no matter what you've got to do, in this moment, we are fiercely alive and together. So what an extraordinary way to start our day and to continue. Courtney didn't have her baby yet, so we get to meet her. Because she's super cool, and we're all excited for the baby, who I know is going to be super cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about detours. During the pandemic, we were running a theater. Nobody could come for 18 months, right? So there's no income, no earned income. So we did a fundraiser online called Destination Detour. So detours become kind of a part of my life now, but it started a long time ago. So you're going to make choices in life that you believe with all your heart and soul are right. And if you truly believe those choices are right, you've got to stick with them no matter what happens. Case in point. I went to Mother of Mercy High School, which now is combos with McCully, and they don't like me telling this story, but I don't care. Been a long time ago. So anyway, in my senior year, I had gotten fabulous scholarships. We had very little money in my family, so I had a scholarship to Brown, I had a scholarship to Edgecliff, I had a scholarship to Xavier and to UC. That was really cool and really exciting because no one in my family had gone to college, all right? And my mom was this ferocious power, as your mom is here. I think there's a mom theme that should be celebrated here today, because without them and without mine, I don't know where I'd be. But anyway, my senior year, my best friend, Debbie, gets pregnant in October. And she's like, and the family, the guy's family and her family, the guy's a total jerk, by the way, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, she decides that what she's going to do is be honest. Because what they told us is, be honest. We will help you through anything. We also, Catholic institution, a life is a life. It is sacred. It's important. You preserve that life no matter what it takes. So Debbie had immediately decided to have the baby. Of course, many of my classmates disappeared after wearing big sweaters for a few months and just came back and had lost weight, and nobody said anything about that. But Debbie decided to be honest and take the school at its word. And she went in October and spoke to the principal and said, this is the situation. I'm not due till April. So if you just let me stay in school, I don't think anybody will really see how, I'm not going to get giant by December. And I'll have all of my classwork finished. I'll have all my credits. So I'm not asking to graduate. I'm just asking to stay till December so that I can walk out of here and be eligible for a degree. And they kicked her out. And they kicked her out by the next day that she came to school. Her locker was padlocked. Her stuff was in a garbage bag, I kid you not, a plastic garbage bag that she was told to pick up from the office. That did something to me. I felt betrayed by my faith. I felt betrayed by actually the institution that was supposed to be putting my faith into action. And I fought it. I fought it all the way to the bishop. I fought it all the way through the system. I fought it and fought it and fought it. And Debbie married and had a beautiful baby boy who now is married and has 2 wonderful children of his own. But it took her, like 15 years to get her GED because she was working and nothing really mattered because she'd been kicked out of school. But anyway, I fought it and I fought it. So my reward for fighting it was that in March of that year, 73 Mercy pulled all my scholarships because they felt I was a disgusting, quote, disgusting example of a young Catholic woman. Because I fought for the fact that I'm not celebrating the fact that she got pregnant, but I was celebrating the fact that she and the boyfriend did the right thing, and there was going to be a life, and that she could have run off to New York. There were plenty of places in the 70s to get a safe abortion, all right? There were places here nobody talked about. She could have done that, and nobody would have known, and the only thing that would have been saved was her life, not her son's life. So by getting my scholarships pulled out from under me, and by them pulling them out so late in my senior year, I had nowhere to go. I had no money. I had a good GPA, I wasn't, the superstar of the class, but I had really good grades. Good enough that when I applied to these places, I got into it. So my mom, who's always been, and still at 88, is a fierce fighter for justice and has been a fierce glass ceiling breaker all her life, said, well, and I said, well, I can't go. What am I going to go on? I'll try to get a job, I'll try to work. And she's like, no, that's not acceptable. I went to a meeting at this place called Thomas More College, and it was really a nice place. And I don't know anything about it, but the place was nice, and she was head then, it was okay to be called a secretary. She was head of the National Secretaries Association, and they had a monthly meeting, and she was the president of the Northern Kentucky chapter, even though we live in Bridgetown. We don't know how that happened. But she came to Thomas More for this meeting, and she's like, we're going to go. We're just going to go over. And she called Thomas More, and I don't know who she talked to, but sure enough, it was probably late April of my graduating year that I went over, and Ron Mellish, Dr. Mellish, who had been the chair of the theater department for many, many, many years, marvelous, marvelous man, met us at the door and said, well, come on in, let's figure this out. What can we do? So I was very honest. I told him my story. We toured the campus. I told him that I could not just major in theater, that I had to get a job. So that I wanted to major in theater and English and secondary education. I wanted that too, because I needed a job. And he said, okay. And then he said, well, you know, what money do you have to put down? And I remember my mom saying, I have $350. And she kind of dropped her head, and he said, well, that's a good start. So they accepted me, and they allowed me work study. And the deal was, if I went all year round, in 4 years I could get those degrees, and if I went all year round, it would spread out the payments so I could do work study. And I had great jobs here. I worked in the public relations office, and I learned how to do press releases, and my typing skills got to be really, really good. I worked in the library one summer, which was fabulous because they were switching over systems, and I got to learn so much about research and how to do that. I had these great, great jobs here, and I was able to, they really had me a full workload. They allowed me to work as many hours as I could while I was going and taking as many hours as I could. So, bottom line is, this organization, this university now, this stood for everything that I had been raised to believe my faith should be about. This place opened doors and hearts and minds to somebody who came from the West Side with a bad rep from their high school, and allowed me to flourish, and allowed me to have incredibly odd ideas, and didn't laugh at them. Sometimes they laughed, but sometimes they would just sort of let it be, and let me do what it was that I wanted to try to do. So then along came grad school, and Dr. Mellish said, well, there's no way that you're going to get into Yale, but if you want to try, you should always try for the best, but realize, you know, it's just, you're coming out of Thomas More College, which is a wonderful college, but you know, Yale, because that's where I want to go. I said, okay. So anyway, I got into Yale. So that was really cool. And then came this ridiculous thing again of like, well, how am I going to do that? I still don't have any money. So Yale was so cool to me. They gave me this letter, which I still have, about how I was accepted and how they would keep me on their books as being an accepted student till such a day could come that I could afford maybe to attend. So I was very blessed, and I gave myself a month after graduation to get a job in theater or a teaching job. Otherwise, my backup was to go to work as a reservationist for Delta Airlines, because they let you in those days like double and triple shifts. So you could make a lot of money really, really fast, and I figured how hard could it be. So I took the Delta training, and for my graduation trip, I went to New York and met a playwright, Robert Anderson, who I had done a report on here at Thomas More, and I directed his play, the first play I ever directed, and this guy was so cool. He actually met my mother and I, took us to lunch. And I told him one day, he's like, well, what are you going to do? And I goes, well, yeah, you can do Delta Airlines, but let me get you a book. So we walked over to the drama bookshop, and he bought me a book that had 47 theaters around the country in. He goes, why don't you write them all letters, put a copy in of your acceptance letter from Yale, and say you want a job in theater now, so that you can start to make some money and go. So I did that. My mom and I went back to our hotel, which was so bad. There were so many bugs that we sat in the bathtub, all right? And we hand wrote these letters to 47 schools, because I decided if I wrote them and mailed them from New York, and they had a New York postmark on them instead of Ohio, somebody would have been. So sure enough, I got 2 responses from those. The nicest rejection letter ever from Alaska Repertory Theater. So I've always been fond of Alaska Repertory Theater. And I got a phone call from Michael Murray at Cincinnati Playhouse, and he was very rude, and it was the day that I got back, and he's like, this is Lynn Meyers, yeah. He goes, Michael Murray, Cincinnati Playhouse. I go, yes, sir. And he goes, it doesn't look like you're qualified for anything, but my assistant just quit, and I'd like to interview you. I mean, where do you live? And I'm like, Cincinnati. He goes, well, it's in New York. You mailed it from New York. I'm like, well, you opened it, right? So I went in and I interviewed, and he said, okay, well, you're totally unqualified, but I've checked your references, and he called some people, and he said, so here's the deal. I'll give you 2 weeks as my assistant, and if you don't work out, there's a job in the box office. And I'm like, great, because I can't turn down Delta if I don't have a job. So I started, and I ended up spending 10 years there, and I ended up becoming the associate artistic director and casting director for the Playhouse before I left. So he took a real shot. It's interesting, because the day I interviewed, it was pouring like this, and the Playhouse was not cool and fancy like it is now. It was cool already, but you know, the offices were in the basement, and so I was sitting there interviewing, and the rain was coming in under the door, and I was so nervous, I didn't even realize that my feet were soaking wet, you know? And finally he goes, you may want to lift your feet up a little bit. But it was about taking the shot, and I was there, and I had a great time learning and growing and answering the phones for people that nobody wanted to talk to, which led to another part of my career. So my first thing is, if you know what you want, you get it. You don't compromise. Compromise is a nice word, but compromising your values is not possible to succeed. If you become what somebody else thinks you should, or you want something so badly that you've got to compromise who you are to get it. I could have gone in and apologized and said, oh, you're right. Oh, my friend made this terrible mistake. No, she didn't. So I ended up exactly where I needed to be, in a place that was filled with acceptance and love and passion and growing. Thomas More College in the 70s was like that, you know, right? I mean, we were like, boom, look out, here we come. And I got to be part of that. Now you're still doing that. You just got a U instead of a C to do all of that. But you answer the calls. So that's another message today. I answered a phone from a guy named Sam Manners from CBS. I thought it was CVS, okay? He calls and he says, yeah, I need somebody to do location casting for this little movie we're shooting about adult literacy in Cincinnati. Do you know anybody that does that? And this is what I said. This is how Lynn. I said, you mean somebody to find local people to be in the movie? And there was this long pause. He goes, yes. And I said, yeah, I do that. And he goes, okay. I've never done that. I had no idea. But that one little film, I've now cast 56 feature films. I've cast television series. I've cast for BBC. I've done all of that because I answered the phone and said yes to something and then got good at it. So it was a little backwards. But if you want it, you can get good at it. There's absolutely nothing you can't do. Don't let anybody tell you you can't. They're wrong. You're the only one walking in your skin. You're the only one who knows your capabilities. And just don't have any doubt. There's enough people out there that'll doubt you, so you don't doubt yourself. After I left the Playhouse, it was super cool. I mean, I had a huge, anyway, blah, 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 end of Playhouse days. I ended up having met somebody else who I'd answered the phone for, an actor, who said he was going to be in a TV series called WKRP in Cincinnati. And he wanted free stuff. I swear to you, I'm calling for free stuff. Well, why do you need free stuff if you're going to be in a TV show? He goes, well, I want to wear like a Playhouse t-shirt and put some Playhouse posters around, because only things I really care about are theater and baseball. And the Reds has given me a bunch of stuff. I'm like, well, the Reds have a bunch of money. If I give you stuff, I got to buy it. I don't get free stuff. And he goes, well, I just think you should do that. So I bought 2 t-shirts. Cost me $8, by the way. Sent it to him in California, and he has the guts to call me back and go, well, these aren't the right size. I'm like, I don't know who you are. So I said, well, it's going to be another $8. And he goes, well, here's the deal. If you ever come to California, you know, you can come and watch a tape into the show, and I promise I'll wear the TV So I ended up getting to go to California to a conference, and I had never watched the show because we in theater don't watch television. We're too busy. I was busy. I was very busy with theater. So I went out and met an actor named Gary Sandy, and he's become a lifelong friend and has done several shows for me at Ensemble and elsewhere around the world. And he was working in Canada at the time. I was cast in a movie in Canada. So I was cast in the movie. I went to see the play, and that led to me getting hired in Canada by that artistic director to direct for 3, 4, 5 years in Canada, a series of shows, at which point I got a call. And watch me, Courtney, or watch me, Judith, watch me, somebody, to make sure I don't talk too long, because they look a little hungry. But I got a call from the head of the board of a place called Ensemble Theatre. And I knew some of their board members because they'd crossed over a little with Playhouse. And this guy called me and he goes, "So I understand you know math." And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "Well, but I mean, did you do math at the Playhouse?" I'm like, "I don't know what you consider math." I think the only class I ever had to take over was algebra. So I'm not. And he's like, "No, what we need to do is basically do a forensic accounting of Ensemble Theatre before we close it. Because we voted to close the theater, but we need somebody to come in and look at the books and let us know exactly where we are." And I'm like, "You don't know where you are?" "No, we don't." And he said, "So we can hire you for 3 months." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "And we can pay you $300 for 3 months." And I said, "Okay," because my mom was here. And I thought, well, you know what, I've made really good money directing all these shows, and I was starting to cast these films. I said, okay, sure, I'll come back for 3 months. Well, when I came back, the short version is they were 1.7 in unsecured debt, 1.7 million in unsecured debt. They were in the worst neighborhood for violent crime in the country. And they had a building that they had bought and spent $3 million renovating that no one wanted to come to. And the second day I was here, there was a dead guy next to my car. And I called the police. My dad, by the way, had been a police officer. I called the police, and an hour and 45 minutes later, they showed up. And their answer was, "Well, you said he was dead, and it's over the Rhine. What did you want us to do about it?" So I got angry. And sometimes if you channel that anger in a really positive way, if you don't go for a weapon, or you don't drive in road rage, if you don't take it out on yourself, if you take that anger and you put it into this really powerful ball that you can toss gently to try to get help and have somebody toss it back, you can put it out there and see if it comes back to you. You can get stuff done. So I stayed, and that's 25 years. We jumped forward quickly because as a child, my grandfather worked his extra. Everybody in my family worked at least 2 jobs, if not 3. That was the deal. And work made you a person. We were defined by what we did, also by the love we had for each other, but mostly what we did, truthfully. He worked at his second job was at Findlay Market on the weekends, and I'm an 8-year-old kid running around Findlay Market, and it's a war zone in the 90s. It's a war zone. My great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my mom were all born in Over the Rhine, and you couldn't even, the places that they had lived were crack houses. There were meth labs. There weren't residents in the 1100 block of Vine Street. There were people who would just sort of crash for as long as they wanted to, trash a place, get in and out of the winter weather, and then move on. There wasn't a residential community till you got farther uptown. So that got me to thinking, if we did a theater that was different than the Playhouse, and different than the touring companies, and different than the community theaters, which there were always wonderful ones in Cincinnati that were community theaters, if we took this idea, because they started Ensemble to be a professional theater to keep people working in town, to hire and pay local artists to come to Cincinnati and stay and work in town. I'm like, okay, if we took that mission and we just added on to it where we are, which is we have to have a social conscience because we are in a war zone. And there are kids walking around the streets that don't have anywhere to go when they get out of school because whoever their caregivers are working their butts off to try to keep them, right? So we just started doing stuff. We opened the lobby after school. We propped our doors open so kids could come in and get a juice box and do their homework or color and be somewhere safe. And the word got out, so the parents and the grandparents and the foster parents and the caregivers started knowing their kids would be safe for 3 hours because we had an empty lobby. Why not use it? We started to recognize that the dealers in town were really scaring people because, you know, they're drug dealers. They're not really attractive. And so on the corner of 12th and Vine, where Taste of Belgium now stands, if anybody likes waffles, much nicer to have an addiction to their waffles than the crack that was sold. I had a dealer on this corner, and then he had a partner on the other corner where a great store Micah is now. And Vine Street, I'll take this off because I can't stand it very long. Oh, now you put this in there with glue. She did this. She looks so pretty and she glued this in. So they decided that, you know, that was their shop. And they were there, and they worked 12-hour days. This was a very sincere crack business that they had going on. I also journeyed up Vine Street and realized that every block that you went uptown towards Liberty, the drugs got more expensive. So we were the cheapest drug in OTR, which was just nothing to be proud of. You know, I mean, it was really bad. But 12th was this one way, and Vine was a one way. So I had cars lined up like Starbucks in the morning, coming over 12th and shooting up Vine. And I had people I was trying to get to come to place. Now they had a social conscience. Now that we're new, we were trying to make some waves with that. And there was this abandoned parking lot, but in order to get from the parking lot to my building, they had to go past the guy, right? So I finally decided enough was enough. So I went up and chatted with him one day. And I said, look, you have a business, and I have a business. Unfortunately, your business, the timing of your business with the timing of my shows isn't working out. So what would it cost me for you to not sell a half hour before my shows and a half hour after my shows? And he looked at me like I was insane. He was like, dude, he just stared at me. And I'm like, I'm serious. And I'd seemed like an hour, I'm sure it wasn't, but he finally said, you got a schedule? I said, yes. And he went, case of Heineken every Friday with a schedule. 3 years we did that. I brought a case of Heineken to 12th and Vine at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon with the schedule of my shows, scotch taped to the top of it, and he kept his word. So sometimes you gotta do business, right? And good for him, because he kept his word. And one day he was gone. I did not go looking for him, but he and his buddy were gone. But I will tell you, you have to sometimes walk a road that is completely uncomfortable. You looked at these gorgeous, beautiful representations you had in this marvelous first speech, and talk about passion. Those women did it. You can do that. Whether it's making $1 billion or making somebody in your family healthier because you find out the need for the health care they do, or going back and finishing a degree that you didn't finish in school, or going and figuring out what best place there is that you can learn to grow, because you don't want to be plan A or B. You want to be this top plan that seems unreachable until you reach it, and then you're going to jump beyond that. So that's what ETC became for me. It became this challenge. All these kids in the public schools were getting no arts education, and trust me, no matter what anybody tells you, they're not getting arts education now. So anybody that's in education, especially if you're in secondary education or primary education, you know, take a look around, because art can really inspire those kids. So we found out about a program called Hunter Heartbeat. Hunter Heartbeat was a free program that we could go to in Columbus and learn what this was. All we knew about it was a program for children who had autism. So I sent my education director, I'm not kidding you, when we pooled our money that day to give him enough gas money to go to Columbus, eat lunch, and drive back. The staff put money in a box and gave it to Ben. He came back electrified. And he's like, this is a true theater games that we can take to the schools that allow children with autism and other special needs to learn how to make eye contact, to learn how to connect, so they aren't the others for the rest of their lives. And his passion was explosive and contagious, like you so beautifully said. Contagious. So now we have 600 children in schools and in homes around this area that we reach every week with these 100 Heartbeat classes. And they're free. Ensemble gets no money for that. So I go around and collect money from people. That's why you apply for grants and foundations and do things like that. Because you see a need and you fill it. You also couldn't be part of your neighborhood if you didn't believe in your neighborhood. So we invested, this is going to sound terrible to those of you that are in high finance, how long it took me, but it took me 12 years to raise $4 million. And after those 12 years, we renovated 4 buildings on Vine Street, buildings nobody wanted. Our original building, then our bar building, which was famous. I don't want you to think I'm up here and I'm not famous. Our bar at 1127 Vine still holds the records for the most homicides in Cincinnati. Yeah, very proud that we bought that and closed it down. But we bought that, and then we had an abandoned parking lot that we bought when we bought the bar. And I don't even want, we bought the bar for like 12 grand. This building, this 4-story building, because nobody wanted it, because the upstairs where the apartments had been condemned. So we were acquiring this, and then the next building went for sale, and I went to Otto Buddig, who was on our board, and I'm like, look, this board member said he'd buy it for us, and he did, but now he wants to sell it for like $100,000 more than he paid for it. So Otto Buddig, hand to God, bought the building from the other guy without seeing it. So then we had 40% of a block, and we were just starting to gain ground, and 01 happened, 2001, and Timothy Thomas was murdered. And I'm sorry if I offend anybody by using those terms, but 13 unarmed black men had been killed by the police in less than a year, and most of them in over the Rhine. And Timothy Thomas, at 19 years old, was killed 2 blocks from Ensemble Theatre. So we had a big, CNN used the theater as the backdrop for coverage. So my poor long-suffering boyfriend in LA, who was still waiting for me to come back, all of his friends were like, is that why Lynn went back to Cincinnati to do that? I mean, how bad must you be, Roger, that she would go there? But at that point in time, we really had to stand our ground and really fight. And from 2001 to now, it has been an uphill battle. The 18 months that we were out, we had 25 employees. Only 4 were furloughed, and we carried them on insurance, because you don't put people out and not carry them on insurance in a pandemic. The others, we got together, we took a vote. After I took my cut and my managing director took his cut, I said, it's a secret ballot. If you're willing to take a 25% pay cut, I can keep everybody employed through the pandemic. If you're not, I just have to do more furloughs. This is anonymous. We did an anonymous vote, and not a single person voted to not take the cut. So we cut everybody employed. And during that time, we commissioned plays to be written. During that time, because schools were down, but you know what, the internet wasn't. And we could reach these kids, a lot of these kids online. And we kept that in school work doing. We also do curriculum work called the Prelude program, which is if a school, for example, Euler School we were working with, and they were struggling with math. So in order to make math fun, we taught them a play about being nickels, dimes, quarters, and pennies. And they had to add themselves up and subtract themselves in the play. And you know what? Their math skills went up 60%. Because if you go to the core of the problem and you do it that doesn't sound tragic, you do it creatively, you can do anything. So leaving LA and leaving a wonderful man who is still in my life, God bless him. His name's Roger Abel, and he has a career out there as a set decorator for television and film. So he's there, I'm here. I don't travel much because my mom is not really up for it, and frankly, I work 7 days a week. But sticking it out here and doing the kind of work that I could never do anywhere else. If I were anywhere else, I wouldn't be running a theater. It was never my goal. But now it's my life. Because I can do work here that I can't do somewhere else. The Playhouse can't do the plays I do because they've got to sell seats. They're a great organization, but of course they're going to do Chorus Line and open their theater with that because they're going to have 600 seats to sell. I have 182. So when I opened my season with Sweat, which is a play by Lynn Meyers about what it was like when the factories started shutting down in Detroit and what's happened to generations of people that have worked for these companies that are going away, I could do that and I could sell seats to that because people wanted to talk about and how does that relate to businesses in Cincinnati. When I did Pipeline, which was a play about the pipeline that so many young black men are on, they go from school to prison. And it's shocking, and it's real. And people came in and said, this isn't real. And I'm like, oh, yes, it is. And here's the stats, and every one of those stats is a person. So quickly, I just want to share a closing thought with you about if you trust yourself and you follow your heart, granted, you have to have a good head, you have to think, you know. Sometimes you have to do stuff that's just completely unconventional. And you have to be uncompromising to do that. So my favorite story is, years ago I did a play called Training for Rain. And it was all about a young man and a group of teens that go to the desert and they were going to have this big party. And if it had rained, they wouldn't have gone. Because, and anyway, one of the young men committed suicide. So I did this play to invite a lot of schools and other people in to try to look at teen suicide in our nation and in our city, because it is incredibly real. When you think that suicide and drug overdoses, be they deliberate or most of them are accidental or taking more lives or as many lives as car crashes, you got to wake up to that. So we were working with a school called the Dawn School, which in those days was a school if you got kicked out of everywhere else and you'd been arrested, you could either go to the Dawn School and finish your degree, or you could go to juvenile detention. So people went to school, and they were not the least bit interested in coming to see a play. I mean, quite honestly, so I used to talk with my hand and I'm doing this. But they didn't want to come, but we gave them a free bus, and we gave them free tickets, and they got out of school. And nobody in Cincinnati was paying for this dark play in the middle of January when it was ugly, so why not, right? So they came to the school, they saw the play, they started like this. They ended sort of like this. And the next day I walk in the building at 8 o'clock, my phone's ringing at my desk, and it's a teacher from the school, and I'm like, oh Lord. We gave free tickets, we gave them a bus, now what did we do wrong? And she said the name of the young man, and she said he came to school this morning and he threw a chair through a window. And so we had to call the police, and it was his third strike, so he was gonna be kicked out. Because, you know, we can't have that kind of behavior, but we asked him when the police got there why he did it, and he said, and I won't use the language because I respect that Jesus is on the cross right there, so I'm not gonna do that. But it was, play. What do you mean? He said, I had it planned, I was ready. Plane screwed my plans up. I realized if I left, everybody who was making my life hell was going to stay. So he had a loaded .45 in his locker. He had a note to his mother. He had a note to some fellow students that had bullied him. And he had it planned that after school, he was going to kill himself on the front steps of the school because he wanted to teach everybody a lesson about how miserable they'd made his life. But he saw that play, and he decided he had to stick around. Because if he didn't stick around, he wouldn't be able to show them all that they were wrong about him. He is now married. He has a job as a manager in a restaurant. He has 2 children. He has a life. Because we did a play nobody wanted to see at the right moment, at the right time for that young man. And if I do nothing else in my life or career, that made it worth it. You will never know what your positive, passionate, sincere actions will do to help another person. But if you do it, if you trust yourself, if you trust your gut, if you trust that I feel this is so right, even if it looks wrong, I'm going to do it, you will not fail. And I'm lucky that I know what happened to him, and I'm lucky that it was a success story. But I want you to think about the person next to you. You don't really know their life. You don't know when something you can do will make a difference for them. So, I have left my business cards here with the fabulous Courtney, and I encourage you all to be my guest. I am sincerely inviting you for a free ticket to come to Ensemble. The play I'm doing now is Morning Sun. It's about the value of one life, and I would love you to come see it. It's an all-female cast, female director, female stage manager, female scenic designer, a female scenic painter, by the way. Come and see it, or come see anything else this year as my guest. Come and see what Faith built, and see the difference you can make if you just believe that you can. And beyond words, thank you for letting me be here. Judith, I so admire you and your leadership, and I was proud when I was on the board that I got to know her a little bit. Thank you, thank you, thank you all, and go change the world.